So now we head into our lunch discussion, an inclusive leadership vision for the future. Leadership is commonly recognized as the key ingredient to motivating people and making change happen. But there are different types of leadership. The Aspen Institute has developed a series of leadership initiatives grounded in entrepreneurship, a values-based approach, and using leadership talent to make a positive impact on society. These initiatives focus on a range of geographic areas and issues. They span from South Carolina to China. They focus on nonpartisanship, education reform, the environment, and health. The leaders, or fellows as we call them, that go through these programs are knit into a powerful global network designed to multiply their effectiveness, which is exactly what we need to do for the next generation of rising leaders, so that they are prepared to sit at decision-making tables and empowered to meet the challenges of the future. So now please join me in welcoming Lisette Nieves, an education reformer, a Pajara Aspen Fellow, an entrepreneur, and founder of Lingo Ventures, a friend, and today our moderator. Yeah.
Good afternoon, everyone. Well, I first want to thank the Aspen Institute because today is a day full of orgullo, full of pride. And I never want to mistake the opportunity to see a room filled that's cross-generation of Latinos. It feels like a family gathering, really, it does for me. And so I just want to put that out there and be excited about that. So we're going to talk about an inclusive leadership vision for the future. What does this mean? What does this look like? Well, I'm really excited that each of the people that are represented today on this panel represents a different fellowship program within the Aspen Group, also represents a different voice regarding the different industries. We have the private sector, we have the public sector as far as government, we have the nonprofit sector. It's also talking about leadership as a cross-sectoral approach that's full of ethics and values about making social and community change. We're also going to look at this notion of how do we understand how our leadership can be amplified and be magnified to make the greatest difference for Latinos and where we serve. With that said, we have some incredible folks that are going to be part of this panel. I want to make sure that we know them here. One of the first that we're going to have is Mark Contreras, the CEO of Calkins Media Incorporated. Mark. We're also going to have Kevin De Leon, California Senate President pro tempore. He is an incredible asset as well. We're going to have Dr. John Dacey, Superintendent in Residence at the Broad Foundation. And we're also going to have Gloria Vetas, President and CEO of Jeremiah Program. Please take a seat. To get us started, and I'm going to sit as well and have this conversation with them, I want to say first, thank you. It's an honor to be up here with all of you. And the first question I'm going to pose to all of you and then join you as I'm sitting too is if you can introduce yourself, talk about the Aspen Fellowship that you participated in, and also how that impacted your lens of leadership.
Go ahead.
Let's start down there.
Let's start with Mark.
Okay, great. I'm Mark Contreras, CEO of Calkins Media. We're a newspaper publisher and television broadcaster. I grew up in Minnesota. You'll hear another Minnesotan here, believe it or not. And my story is very American. My mom is an Irish school teacher. My dad was a Mexican tailor, and they met in Acapulco 30, 40 some years ago. And long story short, I ended up being able to get the chance to go to the University of Chicago, met a guy named Paul Simon, who was a newspaper publisher. And he really infected me with important newspapers. And that began a 30-year career in the newspaper business, which I remain very passionate about even today. I guess we'll continue with other topics after we get to the next.
Can you talk about the fellowship that you were?
Sure. I was a member of the second class of Henry Crown Fellows. keep going. All right, is that better? All right. I was a member of the second class of Henry Crown Fellows. The Henry Crown Fellowship of the Aspen Institute is a program that takes 20 people from all walks of life around the country and puts them through, I believe it's a 4-week course, looking at how leaders handle challenges and how they affect change from the worlds of business, history, politics, and nonprofits. And the Institute, for me, has affected literally everything that I've done in terms of leading large, geographically dispersed organizations. I think you'll hear a similar theme as we go through the rest of the panel.
Thank you. John.
Thanks. I am John Dacey, and LA is my home, although this is a very solid, thick South Boston accent, in case you didn't get that part of it. Born there, grew up in New England, was going to head off to medical school and could not afford that at the time, plus wanted to get married, and so found my first job working in youth prison, and then taught there, and then very rapidly realized that no one there looked like me, and the only way not to be in the pipeline was to get through high school. So moved to New York City, where I learned to be a teacher and then a principal, and spent the last 20 years being superintendent in urban districts, either districts that are almost entirely Latino, Latina, or those with rapidly growing populations. And most recently just finished 4 years in LAUSD, which is the Los Angeles Unified School District, about 909,000 youth. And I had the privilege of being in the inaugural class of the education fellowship called Pahara for a group of us who try to think through education both as an unlocking mechanism and as a fundamental civil right for all youth in this country. And that has been a great experience. My class, I guess, graduated, or whatever we call that, the month before Obama began office, and a whole bunch of us went into the administration, and others took that work basically across the country.
That's great.
Thanks.
Thank you. Gloria.
Good afternoon. I'm Gloria Vetas, and I'm the other Minnesotan on the panel, although really I'm a Tejana. And I was born in San Antonio, and actually, I think in '81, when Henry Cisneros became mayor, I was in high school, and I have to say he's one of the people that has inspired me in my lifetime, and I don't know that Henry's here anymore, but we'll make sure that he knows that. I was one of those kids in San Antonio growing up with a working poor family. My father died when I was 10, and so my mom found herself with 3 young girls. And my older sisters did not have the fortune to go to college. One of them ended up a teen mom, and I was sure that I was going to go to college. And really the only way that I knew how to do that was, frankly, to leave Texas and find people who could help me. And I ended up in St. Paul, Minnesota, and graduated from McAllister College there. And it was such an embracing community that I ended up staying. And now I have 2 adult children and a grandchild who are Mexawegians, as they like to say. And I run a program called Jeremiah that transforms the lives of single mothers and children. So I clearly have a passion for the work that I do today, even though I started my career as an entrepreneur. I'm an inaugural fellow of Ascend, which is a 2-generation a program that looks to elevate the conversation and elevate programs that work on 2 generations at a time to end poverty. And so the work that I do specifically fits within that framework, and like other fellows, it has created a network of other like-minded people around the country that can help me create this kind of a movement across the country.
Thank you. Well, good afternoon to each and every one of you. My name is Kevin De Leon, and in the great Irish tradition, Mark Contreras' mother is Irish, and obviously you heard John Dacey's great Southern Boston accent. And I have a great Irish name, and there's nothing Irish about me at all whatsoever. So I did ask my mom, why did you name me Kevin? I said, no, tú no eres Kevin, tú eres Kevin, I said, okay.
Kevin.
Está bien, So I am part of the Rodell Fellowship. It's a wonderful program that invites elected officials throughout the country at various levels, whether at the federal, state, or local level. It's a bipartisan fellowship, and in a highly hyper-politicized, polemic and polarizing environment, not just on public policy, but even culturally, the Rodell Fellowship brings Democrats as well as Republicans throughout the country to sort of find common ground, if you will, and to try to find solutions to vexing issues that really trouble our nation at the various levels. So it's been a wonderful fellowship to get to know other individuals. I did learn that Republicans don't all have fangs and horns, during the Rodell Fellowship, so thank you very much, But it really does bring Republicans and Democrats, I being the Democrat, together to try to find proactive, constructive solutions, again, in a very hyper-partisan, highly polarized and polemic environment, especially here in Washington, D.C., where things seem to be broken and don't seem to be like they're going to be fixed anytime soon. It tries to find that common ground and to humanize, if you will, the space of politics. So it's the Rodell Fellowship.
Absolutely. And I also have to add that as a moderator, I'm also a Bahara Fellow through the Aspen Institute. And so though I won't be talking as much about that, I get to ask a lot of the questions. What drew me to that was the idea that I would spend a gifted, and I say it's an actual gift amount of time, to really be thinking about what is equity, education, and access mean, what a group of colleagues who care about that nationally and globally. So that's what the gift that it gave me. And I'll say a little bit more real quickly. I came to it because I worked with the young people, mostly, many of them Latinos, who are not in school and not working, where English as a second language wasn't the issue, where immigration status wasn't the issue, disconnection was the issue. And so I add that because this panel also represents the diversity of issues that impact Latinos. So I'm excited about that today. I'm actually going to start with Kevin. Can you talk to me a little bit about what is that passionate driving public policy issue and how your leadership is viewed through that lens?
Well, as the president of the Senate in California, I'm the first Latino in over 133 years. They had one back in 1883. I think he lasted for about 1 year. I think they thought he was Portuguese or Italian, and they figured out he was Latino, and then they did away with him at that time. But it's been an incredible challenge. California's demographics have changed dramatically. It's the first minority-majority state in the country, I believe, where over 60% of the children in the K-12 public school system are in fact Latinos. LA Unified School District, I think it's over 75%, roughly, are Latinos. So the prism in which I try to move policy is with regards to equity in terms of our economic strengths in California. We're the 7th largest economy in the entire world. So it's no longer if Latinos or other people of color or 7%, 10%, 12%, 15% of the population. So there's a sense of noblesse oblige, that we need to do something, for this demographic group because morally it's the right thing to do. Strategically, for our own economic security and quite frankly, being the 7th largest economy in the entire world, for our own national security, it is absolutely critical that we make sure that all individuals, irrespective of who they are, where they come from, the color of their skin, their legal status, have a real opportunity to succeed. And that means obviously access to a good, solid education, higher education. If it's not higher education, then it has to be some type of career technical education in the energy space, for example.
I'd love you to spend an extra minute talking about the work that you've done on climate change, because I think that's something we don't often hear in the narrative and the discussion around policy issues of Latinos. And can you just talk to me a little bit about the bipartisan work you've done there?
Sure. I think that we're leading not just the country, I think we're leading the world when it comes to energy efficiency, climate change policies. We have very ambitious goals to cut petroleum use by 50% in the year 2030. Energy efficiency, the current portfolio stock of buildings by 50%. Obviously, we need a green bank for the capitalization to finance these types of projects. And renewable sources for electricity generation, wind, solar, by 50% by 2030. Interestingly, quantitative and qualitative research, Latinos are at the forefront when it comes to climate policy. Even when you throw every negative question towards them, whether it's a hidden gas tax, whether it's increased electricity rates, Latinos stay very solid when it comes to climate change. And I think that's one of the unknown things, especially by mainstream media in the country, is that Latinos are really at the forefront when it comes to climate change policies in California.
Gloria, you've taken a multiple generation approach
Yes.
in thinking about a solution. Could you talk a little bit about the work you're doing in Jeremiah House and how it's different and where you're scaling?
Sure. So Jeremiah Program is a holistic initiative that really looks at the needs of low-income single mothers with young children. And it was actually the vision of an Irish Catholic priest from the Twin Cities named Reverend Michael O'Connell. And when he was inspired to address the needs of low-income single mothers by the then mayor of Minneapolis, we went and spoke with single mothers who were in school, and we asked them, what are the barriers for you to complete your education? And the first #1 barrier that they talked about was safe, affordable housing. The second barrier that they talked about biggest was quality early childhood education, both affordability and just actually comfort in terms of leaving their children in the care of others. Thirdly, they talked about needing to know how to live their life differently to be successful. And, you know, we've all talked about sort of the codes that exist in society, and so I really likened it to that. So we've translated that into empowerment training and life skill education that's done within the program. Fourthly, the women who were all trying to go to college were sometimes wasting their time in terms of figuring out how to piece together all the credits, so they were not navigating through that educational system very well. So again, we have coaches on site that really help the women connect to the resources that exist in those institutions so that they use them more wisely. And then lastly, they talked about this isolation, this disconnection from the community, being lone voices that had these aspirations and dreams, but not really having the resources within their communities to help them be successful. So Jeremiah has woven together under an umbrella of a campus community, families who are all like-minded, low-income single mothers, 40 about in size per campus. And we started in Minneapolis, expanded to St. Paul, which you might think is not much of an expansion, but St. Paul could be like Philadelphia to Minneapolis, very different communities. And so we expanded to St. Paul, so we have 40 residential units there as well. And then from that, we expanded to communities that wanted to do these kinds of initiatives. So we're in Austin, Texas, finishing a capital campaign there. We intend to break ground later this year. We have an initiative in Fargo, North Dakota. Also has local leadership, which is really important, I think, to the sustainability of our initiative, which is largely public and private. And we're starting a have started a pilot in Boston, which is actually a result of the Ascend Fellowship bringing together a group of leaders, and Dr. Richard Wiley, who's president of Endicott College, was very inspired by Jeremiah and wanted to make available the leadership and the resources that he had in Boston to bring Jeremiah to that community. So we're working on an innovative pilot that at the moment is not residentially based, but trying to bring all of the other elements together and see if, in fact, we can have the same kind of outcomes for families in Boston that we have in other communities.
It's exciting to see that notion of the entrepreneurship and scalability both in your model, and I would also say, Kevin, when I hear New York State senators, I know they're taking it off your speech and what you've done in California, so know that your impact is being felt as well. Another incredible collaborative leader and someone known in the education and entrepreneur space is John. And so much of the work that you've done around thinking about equity, about expanding notions of leadership, about having cross collaborations that make a difference. Can you talk a little bit to that?
Sure. I'm actually going to riff off of my Senate president. I hope in many ways that I'm the last white leader of LAUSD, as I hope I was the last white leader of Prince George's County, which is the county right across the Anacostia here, because I'm a big believer in trying to develop the leadership in the education space from youth to current opportunities. And that has driven this passion. You asked us to talk about where this came from in terms of the privilege I got in my Aspen Fellowship. And for us, and I'll talk about LA for a second, it's an incredibly complex place. It's just unbelievable. The youth live in such amazing circumstances of peril. And every single one of them, whether 30% of them are currently not enjoying documented status, or whether they themselves are in incarcerated situations, or they have no parents, whatever the circumstances, they want to be you. They want a roof over your head. They want part of this thing called the American dream. They want to earn a living wage. And when we came to LA, we simply said that this was going to be about youth's rights, their right to those opportunities, and that we would brook nothing that got in the way of that. And so we looked at this as taking a place who's got lots of agendas, almost all of them adult, and saying that's not the way the public school system has to operate. It's actually for the youth agenda. And we approached this through legislation and regulation and negotiation and litigation. And we did all four at the same time so that we could preserve students' rights. And a piece of those were all done at the same time. And so you can't, for example, have students that our goal is so that we can lift them out of poverty if their parents remain in poverty. And one of the initiatives we did was the 15 and 15, which was, we were the first system in the country to take our negotiated minimum wage, which is about 23,000 employees who were almost all parents. We're being paid $8 an hour, we went to $15 an hour. So the next time that you see SEIU marching through your city on 15 and 15, I'm in that parade, so go easy on the scream and yellow. That's a very important piece. And then the students' rights to have a highly effective teacher every day. You may have heard of a little lawsuit called Vergara, and that is now headed to the Supreme Court in terms of students having the right to be guaranteed an effective teacher in an effective school every day of the year. The opportunity to actually build youth leadership. We all take projects from our Aspen piece, and one of my projects was the Aspen Youth Challenge, and to create an Aspen experience just for youth, which is now in 4 cities, where they go through the experience of a cohort to lift and understand the power of their voices. And lastly, this idea of policy inside of a system and the policy inside of a state where it was really clear that we were willfully criminalizing students. And this suspension and expulsion is a one-way ticket to absolute criminalization. And so we changed a set of practices around the issue of suspending students for willful defiance. I'm not going to go through the statistics, but they're horrific. And so when I first got to LA, we had 49,000 suspensions a year, and 98% were for this issue called willful defiance. They were not for the things that sometimes students do, which are quite problematic. And we got it below 8,000. And we did that by ending the ticketing with our police departments, changing a law in California where willful defiance is not a suspendable offense anymore, and changing the policies in LAUSD. No shock that when students stayed with us, rather than us pushing them away, achievement rose. So we were able to see graduation rates go from 56% to 80%. And while that's great, it's not nearly enough. The work begins, and the idea is to build the leadership of students who successfully complete and then compete for meaningful employment in LA. I mean, we always say LA is America only sooner, and we're coming to a hometown near you. What we look like and what we struggle with and what we're successful with, that is rapidly becoming the story of America.
So true. So true.
And Mark, in thinking about you in media, and I wanted to share something quick with you, the reason why I speak Spanish is because my grandmother had me read her articles in El Diario to her when I was a kid. And so growing up, that's how I kept my my bilingualism alive. And so when I think about media and how much it's changed, we always think about it as how it keeps people apart. It kept me very connected to my culture and my language. So tell me a little bit about your leadership skills and how you're applying it to a very rapidly changing environment in media, and particularly the role of ethnic media.
Sure. I really wanted to give a lot of thanks to the Aspen Institute. I got involved in the late 90s, just after Al Gore invented the internet in 1995 or so. And thank God that happened then, because what that experience allowed us to do is look at leaders that have faced challenges that most people would give up on during day one. And people like Gandhi, our first dinner together in Aspen was to watch the movie Gandhi. And you think, why the heck are you going to Aspen to watch Gandhi? Well, if you think about what he faced, he had to stitch together 22 different languages, thousands of different skill sets, cultures, etc. And the reason for that is that it took patience and perseverance and the ability to stitch together disparate petty interests to look at the bigger picture. So the Aspen Institute really came in very handy when it came time to leading various news organizations through a period of enormous change. The revenues at EW Scripps, where I ran the newspaper group, went down 35% in the space of 2 years. What do you do? How do you keep the mission going? I don't think I need to tell Monica or Don Graham, what life was like in 2009. Jorge's admonition about drinking a lot, that helped quite a bit. But if it hadn't been for the experiences that the Aspen Institute gave me, to say, look, other people have faced other intractable, ugly challenges, I went back on those learnings time and time again, year after year. And as a result, I don't think I've ever been more optimistic today about the ability for news organizations to better serve communities in ways that were unthinkable 5 years ago. We bought all of our journalists at Calkins iPhones. We now transformed a newsroom from a print newsroom to a full-on video newsroom that produces more video than a television station. And those kinds of things are going to ultimately serve those communities that we continue to serve well. And again, I would go back to the gift that 20 of us were given back in 1997 that really helped from the Aspen Institute.
Great. I'm just going to do some questions popcorn style, so not going in the row. Real quickly, Kevin, what was one of those mistakes you learned from and you say, I never want to do it again?
Oh my God.
90 seconds.
One of the mistakes that I'd never do again, oh Lord. That's a good question. One of the mistakes I'd never do again. As an elected official or previous to being an elected official?
Let me say it this way. Reframing is so important today, is it not? Tell me a little bit about a lesson learned throughout your career that you think might be really
lesson learned. It has to do with the media. I was just elected as President Pro Tem. I was with the Los Angeles Times columnist, issue about the Central Valley. I was making an argument at a point that the governor and I were having a dispute about, and I said, tumbleweeds, and that there was nothing in the Central Valley but tumbleweeds. And I was thinking the 5 freeway, which if you go up and down the 5 freeway in the Central Valley, there's nothing but tumbleweeds. He published that, and there was a firestorm up and down the state of California, Fresno and Bakersfield and every points in between, and that how this urbanite Los Angeles Latino so insensitive to the needs of the Central Valley and all these other, it became a firestorm and another story unto itself. So the point being is, I'm very careful now how I engage with the news media right now, so I'm very careful,
He's just doing his job.
Yeah. And taking that out of context,
John,
Yes.
what do you say to Latino,
So,
Latino parents today, the one question they should ask their child's school teacher tomorrow?
I thought you were going to ask me about all the mistakes I had made. Okay.
No, that's a different question. It's a question they can ask the teacher tomorrow.
So I'm going to frame it for just high school parents and then everybody else. For just high school parents, is every single course on that master schedule carries credit. And if it doesn't, I'm not putting my child in any course that does not carry credit. Do these courses guarantee that my child will have access, if they wish, to higher education? And if it's not a credit-bearing course, yank your kid out of that class. You have the right to be in a class that contains a credit-bearing course. You would be shocked and disgusted at the number of courses that students get across this country that have no credit. So what everyday math? I don't know what that is. I know what algebra is. You know, algebra for beginners? No, we know what algebra is. You know, initial algebra? I mean, there are tons of names. It's algebra. And ask that. For the other ones, we want to know what, for the parents, like, what are you reading in class? What are you reading? And if it is not rigorous material, not a handout, not a worksheet, but serious text, I don't think I'm going to keep my child in that class if you are not using serious text. You have the right to say that. Build the voice to advocate for their right.
Thank you. Gloria, a question for you, a little different too. We have all the data. We've seen it nationally, we've seen it internationally, that says when you educate a mom, you educate a family.
Yes.
The outcomes make a difference.
Mm-hmm.
Why aren't we doing it everywhere? Right? Why are we doing it everywhere? What's a message that you can say to this group to take it back home?
You know, I think you're absolutely right. The data does bear true to that, and I think we're not doing more because it is hard. It requires broad-scale collaboration, which is also difficult because there are so many moving parts in the education of a child and the economic stability of a family, and there are some people who think about it polarized in terms of if you know, the bootstrap mentality, you know, if they can't do it for themselves, then let government do it and so forth. So I think people's mindsets need to be changed. And, you know, people often ask why the name Jeremiah program, and it comes out of scripture, Jeremiah 29:11, which says, "Seek the well-being of the city, for in seeking its well-being, goodness shall come to you." And I think about that, you know, seek the well-being of the Latino community, right? For in seeking its well-being, all of us will prosper. And it has that same sort of message for me in terms of why people should get behind educating mothers so they can educate their children. Thank you.
Mark, a question for you. What is your greatest leadership challenge right now? How are you thinking of approaching it?
In an industry that's been rocked with change, how do you continue to inspire hope? And that remains an open question on a daily basis. But again, the tools that I was lucky enough to be a part of through the Henry Crown Fellowship Program have made it a little bit easier. But that's an open question, I think, for many folks like me leading media companies. How do you continue to genuinely demonstrate that there is a path forward that will be prosperous?
I also want to make sure that we allow, since we do have some intimacy here, some questions that can come from the group as well too. But before we get to the questions, can we thank this great panel? Thank you.
I love that phrase about Jeremiah. That was awesome.
And so it'd be great when you decide to ask a question, because I know this is a passionate topic for many of us here. If you just say your name and quickly get your question, and we were able to, there are microphones, as Abigail points out to me, right over there across from Mark, where folks can stand up. Do that. But I'll say a couple of things I want to highlight here. Make sure you remember your child's credit load in school. Does it matter the courses they're taking? Wow, think about that take home. Unpack some of the media messages. Be careful, be conscious, be sensitive to that, right? Mm-hmm. When you help a mother, you help a family. Mm-hmm. Change is the only constant. How we navigate that with hope is a skill. So we need all the supports to make sure that happens. So I'd love to hear any questions for the panel. We cannot be this shy, because I have a whole bunch. Here we go.
I will fill this space again. Marco Davis. Good afternoon, everyone. So my question is, Monica, I think, alluded to it this morning. In fact, Latinos are underrepresented in most major fields. And looking at this panel, Latinos are underrepresented in business, in education, in the nonprofit sector, in government. So my question is, what have you seen that's working to build Latino leaders, to help increase representation? Are there institutes, are there efforts, are there programs beyond all the great fellowship programs at Aspen that folks should look to, that folks should consider, folks should recommend Latinos to participate in order to build their leadership? Thanks.
Wonderful question.
You know, I'm going to respond to that in a way not about what organizations are out there, but I'm going to respond to it in the notion of the kind of hegemonic power structure of whites in this country, in at least I'll talk about education. They're our obligation to be nominating strong Latina and Latinos to all of the organizations that are currently developing that. And that has been a willful and deliberate act by groups of folks that does that. And the power of networks to basically say that these opportunities have to be for not the next generation, it is already the current generation of leadership to gain access. And if you have that privilege, I believe you have this obligation to actually use that privilege to then leverage others. So whether it be the programs that are offered at Harvard in the B School for Entrepreneurs in Education, you get in by nomination. Any organization, any opportunity that gets in by nomination, this is a demand and a responsibility.
Let me take a crack at that question too, because I referenced earlier that California as a whole is a nation state. We just surpassed Brazil a few months ago to become the 7th largest economy in the world. Well, that fluctuates with the volatility of today's global markets, because we can easily lose the position of being the 7th largest economy in the entire world. It is my hope that we surpass the UK and become the 6th largest. But we can easily lose that footing. The reason why is, again, you know, I saw some of the dreamers were absolutely amazing and inspirational. If we do not invest strategically in our K through 12 in higher education, and not just higher education, but career technical education, the economic growth of the state of California will be in peril. It's just the bottom line. So it's not an issue that it makes me feel good, or it's the right thing to do because it's the moral thing to do. Of course it's the moral thing to do, but economically, the whole country will suffer because of it. And I can tell you right now, I just met with the Prime Minister of Japan, Prime Minister Abe, just a few weeks ago, and I met with, you know, a private meeting with Senator Clinton. They're focused obviously on Latinos, obviously in the presidential campaign, but I can tell you one thing right now, it's not that Latinos right now are the sort of the flavor of the month or the year or the electoral cycle. The reality is with the projected demographics that we're facing today, President Obama had mentioned it, you just mentioned a few moments ago. In President Obama's State of the State speech, he talked about the future of America. Well, I can tell you this right now. The future of America is California today. So that means the good. That also means the not so good as well. So if we don't get it right in a whole variety of spaces, whether it's education, higher education, minimum wage, whether it's the dearth of VC money in Latino projects, if we don't get it right, then I think the whole country will suffer because of it.
And I want to make sure we also, I think there's no question of that. It's so fascinating to be on a panel as a New Yorker where it's so much about California.
Oh, in Manhattan. You got Manhattan, Brooklyn, and this stuff.
But I want to make sure that we answer that about what are some pathways that have opened opportunity, Marco, because I think that is significant. I'm going to add something, and I'd love for the rest to do that. I think one is I want to make sure that Jorge Benitez is highlighted here, because he hired alums from a program called Year Up that I helped start for disconnected young adults, and gave them a pathway to beyond a living wage to create opportunity for their families. And I thank you for that, because that's about sponsorship and advocacy that happens. And so I think that's important. I think that internships are critical, however we can do that. is critical. We see so many young people getting through, but then economically marginalized. How do we make sure we keep an eye on that? There's the Truman Scholarship Foundation, Haku, others who do an incredible job at that. I want to make sure we get that out there. But I want to make sure I hear from you, Mark, and Gloria and others, because these pathways are not necessarily known to everyone.
Well, I mean, one point on the question, which I thought was an excellent one, is structures matter. And whether you're in business or whether you're in the private sector or in the nonprofit sector, where you sit in the organization matters quite a bit. And there's a group that has recently started. Pat Pineda is in charge of a group called the Latino Corporate Directors Association. If you look at the number of directors on the top Fortune 500 companies that are Latino, there are about 171. And let's assume every board has 10 members. If you do the math, it's 3% of American companies' top 500 have Latino directors on them. And just like we heard from Cesar and Walter earlier, the reason that we're sitting here is because a trustee, a director of the Aspen Institute, blew in the ear of the executive director and president of the Aspen Institute to create this. So I guess my input here would be that getting Latino directors like Jorge into companies that matter can have a very powerful effect on an answer to that question.
I want to make sure we're going to get another question,
Yes.
Gloria, and I'll let you.
Absolutely.
Please.
Hi, my name is Ana Roca Castro from Latism, Latinos in Tech Innovation and Social Media. My question is to the panel, but also to Abigail and to the rest. Now what? I think we've been doing a great job, almost preaching to the choir. We all nod, we all believe in what we're all saying, and you guys have done an amazing job in the panel. Now what? We have an amazing list of people here, resources. Now what? You know, are we gonna go and pat ourselves in the back, or are we gonna make a real difference, carajo? You know, what are we gonna do?
That's a great question, right? I will say this too before other members join in. I think that one is the assumption that we're all used to being in the same room with the same people. I actually don't think that's the case.
Yeah.
Right.
We don't do that cross-generationally enough. So this is powerful to have that mix here, and I want to thank the Aspen Institute for that. So we cannot ignore that. I want to thank Natalie Reyes and others who made sure we had that cross-generational representation here. So I think there is that, right? So there is, so I want to make sure that we know that. So for some of us who assume a level of fatigue, it is a brand new world for others. And so we need to work in combination with that. But I want to hear from others, and we could think through ideas.
Yes.
Gloria.
Well, I was just going to say, I mean, I think it's a great question to be posing at this time in the program, and it is something that I think we all grapple with, right? We leave and we go, so what am I going to do as a result? And I think that's a very Aspen-esque, you know, question to say it's not just enough to be grappling with these big ideas, but what are you personally going to do? And I think that was the challenge to, you know, to tweet and to talk, you know, about what we're going to do as a result of today's event. And so as an example, one of the things that I did, and I didn't tweet, I actually emailed, because I'm not sure about tweeting myself personally, but I emailed a couple of young people, family, non-family, and said, look at these amazing panelists that I'm with in Washington, D.C. My commitment is to go back and have a full conversation with them about that. And it sort of links back to the question about mentorship. And, you know, I believe we all have a commitment and to be mentors and to identify the people who maybe want to be mentored but don't have the courage to ask. And I think that's really important. And so when we see a glimmer of hope and some passion in somebody, how do we personally cultivate that? Because it happens person by person, one person at a time. And that's the only way I think we're going to change people's minds and behaviors.
I'm going to offer two suggestions that are going to be sector specific, so to education. So we're watching a ridiculously vitriolic debate about standards and assessment in this country. I don't know many privileged parents who would even have a debate about whether we should have less than college and work-ready standards. And yet the debate is for the other. And I think the notion that if we're going to have Congress reauthorize No Child Left Behind, then the piece on that has to be for every member of Congress who has their own child in a local public school. Are you comfortable with those sets of standards? And so if we wanted to change that debate, very simple rule, you actually can't be a member of Congress unless your own child is in a local public school. And I think that would be an opportunity to reframe that. The second piece I would offer is this painful process towards immigration reform. I don't mean to suggest that it's as elegantly simple as I'm about to say, but you could transform overnight the country if a full high school graduation diploma came with full citizenship. For a student in the country, you would have a tremendous change in economic trajectory, in the staying power of youth through school to get that diploma, just like we would not be able to do that. That would be a great unlocking mechanism. So those two pieces have me very energized to think about sweat equity on those two notions.
Déjame enfocar lo que dijo la compañera hacia medio, corto y largo plazo, ¿no? Al final de cuentas, lo que está en juego son las políticas públicas, ¿no? Public policy, a los diferentes niveles. Lo que dijo el compañero hacia el largo plazo, una reforma migratoria integral, al final de cuentas, ¿no? Para que crezca, ¿no? La economía del Estado de California, pero también invirtiendo la educación superior, los grupos no lucrativos, early child care, which is absolutely critical. We have the empirical data que muestra, ¿no? Concretamente, that for kids who are poor, a child who is the youngest child of a single immigrant mother with a third grade education, the only one to graduate from high school in my family, being the youngest one, when you go, you know, we're not ready to learn when we're in kindergarten. We don't know our colors, we don't know our numbers. Why? Because the common denominator is poverty. So it doesn't make a difference if you have a panel that says, well, I can't get VC money because people who look like me can't get in front of John Doerr and the folks at Cisco and elsewhere in Silicon Valley. Or what Jorge Benitez at Accenture, people like me, we're on boards of the Boys and Girls Club of Boyle Heights or East LA, but we're not on a board that pays us $250 a year. We get to show we have fiduciary responsibility, but we get dividends and so forth. I had a friend, Mexicano, grew up in Barrio Logan in San Diego. He said to me about 4 or 5 years ago, the Honorable Gil Cedillo and I know him very well. I'm on the board of directors. Oh, great. What is it, the Boys and Girls Club, YMCA? He says, no, they're paying me $250,000 a year. I almost fell out of my chair. I said, what? He said, there's no one that looks like me at all whatsoever. And this is how, with a sense of intentionality, el red social que existe, I went to Harvard, I went to Yale, I went to Stanford, I'm summa cum laude, I went to Brown. This network in itself perpetuates itself at various levels. That's why the first time when I went to Aspen Institute, I was like, who are all these people? And where did they come from? It was like a parallel universe of another door. Who are these people? I've seen them on television, you know, but it's like, so it's that world that continuously perpetuates itself like a compounding interest. And that's why you get certain demographic groups, Latinos, African Americans, and others, who continuously stay out. So that's why you have to have a sense of intentionality, because the market in itself is not going to correct the inequities that exist in our society.
That's right. Very good.
Nice job.
I have the challenge and the privilege of closing us out. I'm looking at the clock right there as well, too. I do want to say, as a member of being part of the Aspen family, we all have projects we have to do. We have to do that very clearly. Now what? And so to give you a little insight, I linked up with a few other Aspen fellows, and we're actually doing roundtables around the country of Latino cross-sector leaders around what does an education platform mean if Latinos had a voice at the table. And so that's the project I'm working on. We have a variety of other projects, and I will say that this is just the beginning of what can be the possible. With that, can we thank this incredible...
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks. Thank you. Likewise. Thank you, Gloria. Thank you, Senator.
Don't you know?
Thank you.
You're great.